Every individual has a capacity to protect himself to lead a comfortable life. Sometimes, in few situations, it and superego fights a lot. It creates internal conflicts that create a lot of anxiety. Then, ego uses defense mechanisms so that anxiety will not build up. Defense mechanisms are defined according to the Bhatia in 1829. He says every individual has mental capacities or devices to protect himself against an anxiety or psychological distress. Jammer 2000, he defined defense mechanism is a method used by individuals to reduce anxiety or stress to improve self-image. Let us see what are the synonyms for defense mechanisms. We can call defense mechanisms as ego defense mechanisms, mental mechanisms, and adjustment mechanisms. Coping mechanisms are different from defense mechanisms. Coping mechanisms are conscious psychological strategies to protect individual. Be aware what are the strategies we are taking to protect us. Those all called as coping mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are unconscious psychological strategies to protect individual in unfavorable situations. Many a time when we use defense mechanisms, we don't even realize that we are using defense mechanisms. Purposes of defense mechanisms. Main purpose of defense mechanism is to reduce the stress and anxiety, and also it resolves the conflict and enhances the coping mechanism. Defense mechanisms are divided into successful and unsuccessful mechanisms or positive and negative mechanisms. Many number of defense mechanisms are present, but in this session I will be discussing important defense mechanisms. Successful defense mechanisms, which includes repression, rationalization, intellectualization, compensation, substitution, and sublimation. Unsuccessful defense mechanisms, also called as negative mechanisms. Successful mechanisms are called as positive defense mechanisms. Unsuccessful defense mechanisms, which include suppression, reaction formation, displacement, denial, isolation, projection, regression, conversion, fixation, and fantasy. Only way of remembering defense mechanism is remembering examples. Repression, it is involuntary blocking of unpleasant feelings and experiences from one's awareness. For example, a woman who have sexually assaulted when she was 15 years old, she cannot remember that experience in a later life. If she is remembering, she may suffer with the mental disturbances. So she hides this memory in a unconscious state. Another example, a child who is abused by a parents in a childhood later has no recollection of these events, but the child will have a troubling in forming a relationship with the parents. Rationalization, it is the attempt to make excuse or formulate logical reasons to justify unacceptable feelings or behaviors. For example, students who come late to class may complain that the hostel mess served food late. Here, student trying to give a logical reasoning to justify her unacceptable behavior. Another example is this rationalization can be seen in substance abuse cases. When we ask alcohol addicted client, he will say that I have lot of pain in me to forget this pain I am drinking. And also he says that if I am not drinking alcohol, I'll die. He is trying to give us a logical reasoning for his unacceptable habit. One more example of rationalization. A husband does not enjoy the company of wife outside the home and usually leaves his wife at home. He gives a logic that his wife is socially shy. Intellectualization, it is an attempt to avoid expressing actual emotions associated with the stressful situation. For example, a doctor is diagnosed with the pancreatic cancer. When a surgeon comes to meet him, rather than talking about anything, he starts talking about pathophysiology of cancer, What doctor is doing is expressing intellectual process to hide emotion of pain, which is there because of diagnosis of cancer. Compensation is the covering up of a real or perceived weakness by emphasizing a trait one considers more desirable. For example, a student who fails in his studies may compensate by becoming the college champion in athletics. Another example is a plain girl who cannot compete with her more beautiful sisters may compensate by studying hard and come first in her class. Sublimation is the rechanneling of drives or impulses that are personally or socially unacceptable into activities that are more tolerable and constructive. For example, a person who have an aggressive behavior and like violence, blood and flesh, all these activities are considered as socially unacceptable behavior. Such kind of individuals uses sublimation, and he can become a surgeon so that he can play with blood and flesh, and this work is considered as a acceptable behavior by a society. And another example for a sublimation is a teenage boy with a strong competitive and aggressive feeling can become a football player. Or another example is a young man who has lost his lover may turn to write poetry about love. Suppression, the voluntary blocking of unpleasant feelings and experiences from one's awareness. Only suppression we take it in a conscious state. For example, a person who had an argument with a close friend at last night voluntarily take a decision not to think about his argument with the close friend while going for an interview. Another example for a suppression is student consciously decides not to think about her insult in examinations hall so that he can do well effectively in exam. Reaction formation, preventing unacceptable or undesirable thoughts or behavior from being expressed by exaggerating opposite thoughts or types of behavior. For example, women who actually dislike her mother in law hide her feelings by being always nice to her. Displacement, it is the transfer of feeling from one target to another that is considered less threatening or neutral. For example, if your teacher scolds badly, you cannot say anything to your teacher. So you will go to room, show that anger on beating your friend or shouting on your friend. Here your displacement is you are showing your feelings on others. Another example, a husband comes home after a bad day. That person had a angry with his boss but cannot show it for fear of losing the job. May fight or show that angry on his wife or children after returning from our office. Denial, it is the refusal to acknowledgement the existence of a real situation or the feeling associated with it. For example, a person who is newly diagnosed with oral cancer may not admit even though there is a confirmatory laboratory findings. Here, this person is not at all accepting real situation that he is suffering from cancer. Another example for denial is a woman who got a call from office saying that her husband expired due to some accident, but she doesn't accept to the believe the news which she have heard. She believes that her husband is alive. This news creates a lot of anxiety in a woman, so she refuses to accept a real situation. Next, projection, attributing feelings or impulses unacceptable to one's self to another person. In this, placing blame for own difficulties upon others. Here, others are seen as responsible for own mistakes. One's own unacceptable feelings and thoughts are expressed as they are due to others. For example, a surgeon whose patient does not recover as he anticipated may tend to blame the scrub nurse who helped at the time of surgery. Separation of thoughts, ideas, or impulses from its associated effect, ensuring that action does occur. For example, if a teenage boy got an accident with his bike, he stops riding bike and never talks about it. Here he is isolating a thought of riding a bike. He had a bad incident with the riding bike, so separating the thoughts of ideas or impulses, he's totally separating doing that task in life. Identification, attaching to oneself certain qualities associated with others. It operates unconsciously and is a significant mechanism in superego development. For example, in childhood, girls identify with their mother. Later on, they perhaps with their teacher, and later, still perhaps with a film star. Substitution, the individual replaced one goal for another or involve more acceptable form of activity than displacing the emotion on another individual. Example, a student who has not been able to get admission to the MBBS course may try to substitute with the course of physiotherapy or B.Sc nursing or BDS, any other kind of courses they choose.